And before we get into this, as I mentioned, 3 things we're going to do. We're just going to do a quick walkthrough to remind ourselves of what we're talking about when we talk about Ci3T in entirety. And we're going to think about your successes. And we will today have a small group discussion on what is something that I want to do right now between now and the end of the year to close this out productively. One thing that you can control might be higher rates of behavior-specific praise. It might be recognizing colleagues. We're going to talk about it. And then we're going to talk, as I mentioned, about planning out the school year and then setting our own professional learning targets. So keeping in mind where we are right now, thank you so much for being here and investing in this time, hopefully to take back some resources that you can use to support people completing this year. And again, as always, please know that I know a lot of us come to these sessions because we really are looking for guidance on how to keep things moving forward academically, take care of kids' social and emotional well-being, and manage really challenging behavior. And we know that the percentage of kids with challenging behaviors, even pre-pandemic, was already substantial, with as much as 20% of all school-age youth having some type of internalizing or externalizing behavior patterns. And Wendy might be able to recall this from her rote memory today, but today we were actually working on a manuscript and updating the statistics to talk about how much more certain things like anxiety and depression have increased since 2016. So we know this is not idiosyncratic to a certain point in time, but it's pretty pronounced. And I want to remind you that not every child with a challenging behavior is going to be supported in special education services. And I think sometimes people are under that misperception. And that's part of my deep appreciation for you as individuals that are here, because you have embraced systems that have been built based on information literally coast to coast from thousands of teachers. And literally, we have a sample of students of 82,000 kids from 4 geographic regions, 124 schools. And we have learned from all of you for close to 15 years that this is complicated. This is big work. And it is so worth our time, because we do know that the screenings that many of you are doing, like specifically looking for kids with internalizing and externalizing behavior patterns, that's giving you important information, because we know that information actually predicts how kids end the year. We know that kids that have higher than average challenging behaviors end the year with more suspensions, more office discipline referrals. They don't do as well academically. And it's not just at the elementary level where we see lower rates of reading performance and lower rates of math. We also see across the board higher rates of course failures for kids that come in struggling. We also see kids failing more classes. And there are some studies to show that even attendance is impacted by that. So I appreciate what you're investing in. I know there are easier paths. And some days we just literally want to shut our classroom door and think, I just want to keep a lid on this and manage this myself. But our job has become bigger than our classrooms. And that's partly why I think, the Institute of Education Science has been so very generous in funding 4 specific projects, all designed to figure out how to evaluate and implement and study integrated tiered systems of support, such as the ones that you are putting in place in your schools right now. And whether or not you implement Ci3T specifically, or you're doing some other type of integrated tiered system, what I really would like us to think about right now is just push pause, think about whatever context you're in, whatever school, whatever district, whatever state. And I just want you to remind yourself right now, take a walk down memory lane about what you've committed to as far as serving all the students in your district. So for those of you that are implementing a Ci3T model, it's one integrated system. Positive behavior intervention support is at the heart. And there's an equal commitment, of course, to meeting kids' academic needs. And we do that through a whole series of research-based and evidence-based strategies to maximize engagement and limit disruption. Because any of us can invest in a really good curricula, but it's an art and a science to get kids to maximally engage, whether that's the 1st grade kid or the 5th grade kid that you're trying to get to engage in a 90-minute ELA block, or get kids at the middle and high school levels to engage productively in science labs, social studies, etc. conversations. We need clarities on that. And across the world, and I know some of you were doing this way before pre-pandemic, there's been this priority placed on helping kids to take care of their well-being, literally teaching them the skills they need to recognize, be self-aware, to self-regulate. And as you look at those stats that Wendy just put in the chat, thank you for that. There's been a 29% increase in anxiety and a 27% increase in depression between 2016 and 2020. So the problems are not small in magnitude. And most of these kids are going to be served within our school systems, largely led by the general education community. But fortunately, you have all built systems that integrate these goals of meeting kids' multiple needs. And it's not like you can ignore kids' well-being, you can ignore behavior to focus on academic, but occasionally I am sure you still hear in your building some people saying, don't worry about any of that, just focus on academics, or don't worry about academics, let's just teach behavior at the beginning of the year. We know we can't do that, because you can't say to a child, check all your emotional trauma at the door and we're going to get to that in 3 months. That absolutely doesn't work. So when we're thinking about the work that you are doing in Ci3T, I would encourage you to remember that if you are one of the schools implementing, or if you're somebody that's exploring it, that you have this implementation plan that delineates everything that you're prepared to serve. You've heard us say before, Ci3T is the plate. And we've had one of actually our district partners said that she described it as, and we're serving all these things in our school to all, to some, and for a few. And I thought, what a great extension of the plate analogy. But when you're thinking about right now, reflecting in your context, do you see these strategies like using pre-correction, using behavior-specific praise? Are we teaching the adults how to do these things to maximize engagement and limit disruption? And if you think, yeah, we've got some great successes, jot those down in your mind right now. Keep in mind, like, yeah, we do those things really well, or maybe we haven't gotten to those yet. And if you haven't, that's okay. So you've got people like, David Royer did a great systematic review on instructional choice. Eric Common did one on all the studies that were out there for increasing opportunities to respond. Wendy and others have done them on high probability requests. We've got Grant Allen, who's not here yet tonight, but he did a whole series on active supervision. But the bottom line is, and there's volumes written on behavior specific praise, like when it's done with it being delivered by a teacher or done by a coach. So the point is, there's a bunch of stuff out there that we know works. Similarly, and this is probably one of the most important things I would hang on to right now, is at this time of the year, we can expect that the wheels are going to fall off the bus sometimes. And we want to have a plan where every adult is reminded about how to respond respectfully when those challenges do happen. And if you have in your implementation manual, if you have that reactive plan at the top of it, where you're saying like, here's minors, here's majors, here's what gets managed in your classroom, or here's what gets managed in the office, please remember that you want to start by showing empathy. We want to, before we teach people how to fill out an office discipline referral, we want to teach them the 6 steps to being really prepared to show empathy, keep instruction moving forward, acknowledge kids that are meeting expectations, redirect and reteach as we need, give kids a couple minutes or seconds even to get back on track, and then go acknowledge them. And lastly, when you've committed to a social and emotional well-being curriculum like Second Step or Positive Action or Connect with Kids or Harmony, whatever it is, we want to make sure that that is taught in a predictable way faithfully, so that every student in your building, and ideally in your district and in your community, gets instruction in those skills, so that as they're then interacting across the school setting and in the community, that they have an opportunity to be on the same page. So when you are thinking about the amazing things happening at your school, what is happening there right now? What are you teaching? How are you teaching this in an integrated way? How are you reinforcing people? And this is, I think, the place to lean in tonight. How are you going to reinforce and acknowledge the adults who are engaging this right now, so that we can change the adult experience, so they can change the student experience? And in Ci3T models, we learned that prior to the pandemic starting, some work done that was led by Wendy Oakes, we've learned that teachers, after 2 years of implementing Ci3T, when they hit that 75 to 80% mark for fidelity, the studies that our team has generated, as well as those by Scott Ross, it is suggested that teachers actually report lower burnout rates than the national average and a higher sense of efficacy in their teaching, not in every area, but in several. So you've built something that's healthy for the adults and healthy for the teachers, and that's great, and for the students. And of course, it's all data informed. And when we talk about data informed, we're using data to look at implementation, the treatment integrity, social validity, how kids are doing. And when we think about that complex thing of getting it started, we want to introduce this very practical lesson plan. And hear us now, believe us later, We are not suggesting that you go tell teachers to write this lesson plan right now. And David, thank you for smiling. Instead, we want you to think about this conceptually, though, of in your mind, think about helping the adults to know that it's connected. You're not going to stop teaching to do the behavior thing. You're not going to stop teaching to do the social skills thing. It's going to get woven together. So you see here how there's like academic objectives, and then it's like reminders about this would be a great time for us to practice, self-control. So like when you're reading this literature book today, we know we've got some characters in this story who have been completely out of control. Like if you're reading Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, what a great opportunity to talk about all the missed opportunities for positive, productive interactions. And so you might say, when we're reading these books, you're each going to be assigned a different character. And I want you to really think, like, what did people do really well? Where did they need some additional support? What that could have looked like? And then you're going to remind them of the behavioral expectations for when they get into those small groups, when they start to hear that their ideas might be different than somebody else's, and that's okay. And then up at the top right, all those low intensity supports that we just looked at a second ago, knowing when you're going to incorporate those is going to help drive engagement. So like when Joni was a teacher, she might have built, instructional choice into starter activities. She might have been really intentional about doing pre-correction strategies to remind kids of what they were looking for before they got into that section. But these big pieces, clarifying the objectives for kids, looking at low intensity supports, we want that to be the tier 1 experience. And we want teachers to be exhausted at the end of the day from praising and complimenting and teaching and helping kids to make connection. That's a way better tire than feel like you have to respond to 99 things. It does feel better than having a whole day of redirecting. That's exhausting. It's exhausting emotionally. It's exhausting physically. So part of the gift also for those of you that are implementing your Ci3T models right now is that you have data. Like from the teacher perspective, every adult gets to say what they think about the goals, the procedures, and the outcomes. That's great news. We also have information in fall and in spring about what is happening in terms of teaching and reinforcing and how you're using data. And those data are going to help to drive decisions about if tier 1 is in place and implemented with fidelity, then maybe we've got the opportunity now and the resources to start thinking clearly and intentionally about who might benefit from tier 2 or even tier 3 supports. So when we think about all these great things in your building, maybe it is integrated lesson planning. Maybe it is that you've really built some capacity at looking at multiple sources of data and being able to look across to see what does each individual kid need, not just on one little slice, but on the whole kid, like the kid that's struggling with the attendance. We know that has to be part of the intervention. We would expect kids that are not regular attenders to be really engaged, right? In school, because they're splintering their skills by not being there and being able to access it. It might be you think, man, we really actually have done an awesome job this year in terms of these low intensity strategies. We focused on behavior specific praise, or we did instructional choice. And you may be thinking, we've actually built a really nice library of all these supports. And now you might be thinking about how can we take it deeper? Maybe we did this great with our classified staff, but maybe we've got room to grow with our certified staff, or it might be the opposite way. We did it great with our certified and not yet with our classified. Or maybe you're ready to start thinking about sharing these strategies with families, regardless of where you are at in terms of, do I have full integration? Am I doing all these pieces? I want you to take a moment, if you will, to think about what has gone really well in your building this year or in your district, things that you are proud of. And maybe it's these pieces of building a tiered library. Maybe you focused heavily on tier 2 or tier 3. Maybe it's been a focus on those teacher delivered strategies. Maybe you've done an amazing job at looking at these data. If you are a school that's implementing Ci3T right now, you might also think about the strength that you've got in terms of the district supporting you with getting information on implementation. There's this little infographic that's on our website, and I'm sure our team would be happy to put this in the chat just so that you can find this. But this might be like something that you want to think about sharing out with people. So like reminding them the why that you collect this information, the gift of what you're doing, whether you're filling out the tiered fidelity inventory or you're using your Ci3T self-reported direct observation. is along with the social validity data, you are getting every adult an opportunity to get a snapshot of what implementation looks like in fall or looks like in spring. And you can use it for decision making. And I think a huge part of it is taking the time to celebrate the success. It is so easy to focus on the negative of things, but by giving faculty a voice, they also get a chance to tell you what is going really, really well. And we've heard from people for many, many years that sometimes they're afraid to say the positive things that are happening in a faculty meeting because they don't want to lose social capital for the people that are anti-praise, the people that, forgot that they still like children. So it's important to give people a format to have successes and identify areas for growth and to inform professional learning. And what we mean by that, especially if you're here as somebody that's not yet collecting in treatment integrity data, like on some of the specific items, you can look at things like, are these procedures manageable? And this is like one of the items on the social validity survey to find out what people think about the goals, the procedures, and the outcomes. When they look at that, if that item had been low, they would have had an opportunity to think about what can we do differently to make things more manageable next year? Could we have really thought through more carefully about windows when the assessment windows were going to open and close? Could we have given people time during faculty and staff meeting? Or might it be that, some people are saying that I've got what I think is necessary, that the plans give us the information that we need to inform instruction. Sometimes people often share out that, we want to see what you're getting, because sometimes people are sharing and wondering, like, what is everybody else's experience? So you can actually find on our website these little slide decks where you can do updates. And this would be a wonderful thing to think about doing for this year in terms of summarizing where are we at in terms of what do people think about the goals and the procedures and the outcomes. And there's a tool, and it's called the Primary Intervention Rating Scale. It's on the Measures tab. And I see that Rebecca, thank you, has already put it in the chat. So like if you wanted to even send that out to find out what's going well for people, what do you think? And there's some open-ended item responses as well. But you could look at those data with your fidelity data to identify some specific targets. So for example, and these are data from a school, in this particular school, goes up to a mean of 3 as a high. In this school, they were indicating that, I'm teaching these lessons, but I'm not yet really integrating it into my daily instruction. That might be a target for the entire school, to learn a little bit more about how to weave those lessons that are being taught, like on things like empathy, self-control, cooperation, assertion, like how are you going to put those into learning opportunities as part of tier 1 practices? Again, leaning back into that idea of that integrated lesson plan. It also might be that your data look like this, where there's room to grow at tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. But if you didn't collect this information, you would miss the opportunity to be able to look over time to see how your school or your district is progressing in terms of implementation of tier 1 practices or tier 2 practices or tier 3. And right now there is a new TFI that is under pilot and hopefully available hopefully in the next year, but it's going to allow you an opportunity to really take a close look at those items of integration. So as you're thinking about all these pieces right now, I'm thinking about the successes that you just had. I'm going to invite you right now in just a moment to go to a breakout room and start the conversation about how do I think about all the good things that are happening in my building, and how can I find a specific actionable item of something that I might want to do or support people in my building in doing in terms of closing out the year. Is it that I want to lean back into something as simple as going back to like what Mindy was just sharing, like let's either grab my tickets or grab my digital reinforcement system and really reteach those expectations and acknowledge some kids? Would you like to write praise notes to the adults in your building and colleagues that you see really invested? It's like adults can really use that right now. Like reinforcement's a little thin towards the end of the school year. So maybe you take one of your tickets and you write a note to an adult saying, hey, I saw you do such a great job of active supervision in the cafeteria yesterday. What a difference it made. The room was so much cleaner and the noise level was so much more manageable. Like, let's take a moment to think about how we might do those. Or maybe you want to just do a little booster for the adults in your building to say, I know we've got 16 days of school left. Let's keep it as positive as possible. Let's remember that when a kid's starting to go off the rails, show empathy. I see today's kind of tough for you right now. get all the other kids started so they're not capturing a lot of attention to maintain that behavior, and have an opportunity to maximize respectful responding. Or maybe, like, if you haven't yet focused on any of your social skills lessons towards the end of this year, maybe we want to do that now so that you really can think about, what do our kids need right now before they leave our context? You've got some kids right now that are going to be leaving high schools and they're going to be going into the workforce or into college. What do they need? This is our last opportunity to connect with them. You've got some kids at your elementary school that will be transitioning to middle and middle to high. This is a wonderful opportunity, last opportunity to connect with some kids. So as you're thinking about, what do you want to touch on between now and the end of this year? Is it responding to challenging behavior? Is it those academic indicators? Is it this? Do we really want to just do a quick refresher for adults, and not in a stressful way? It could literally just be taking a screenshot of this to say, hey, I was just reminded of a few quick ways that we can respond when challenges do happen, so that we spend a little less time working on filling out office discipline referrals. Or maybe it's this idea of just saying, I know many of you do this, but I wanted to give you this visualization, not asking people to fill it out, but just to say, I know these are the great things that we're doing, and I would love for anybody to share out how they're using pre-correction or building in choice or building out their tiered library or going a little bit deeper. So if you would, right now in your breakout room, I'm going to invite you, if you would, to think about how you might want to close out this school year. What's one actionable thing that you as a person might take back and do as a practice for yourself, or you might encourage another colleague to do it. And as you're doing that, please balance that out with your strengths. So enjoy that conversation, and we'll catch you back in about 10 minutes. Actually using it as an instructional tool, teaching your social skills. And if you don't have in your building a planned, like appendix or table or chart or calendar that says, here's the general plan, like sometime during this week, teach these 2 lessons, sometimes during this week, teach these 2 lessons, that would be really cool. It's like if you're teaching Second Step or Connect with Kids or whatever your curriculum is, there's a guide in there on how to teach those, like how to pace it out. The value of doing that in a system-wide place is, like, think about the benefits and think about what a gift it is if all the kindergarten kids in the building got the same instruction about the same time. And if all the adults knew, hey, this is what we just taught all the kindergarten crew about sharing, or how to, ask for help, or, then the adults can be on the lookout for those. So then kids get feedback from lots of adults to know, hey, you're on track, you're doing this right. That will help those new skills to generalize. And the same is true for first, for second, like all the way up through 12th grade. So as you're thinking about what's expected, one of the things that you might want to ask right now when you go back to your districts is there anything new that's going to be planned for next year? Like, in other words, are there any new revisions from the district level that are going to get incorporated across the plans? For example, some districts will say they'll prioritize different low intensity supports at different times of the year. So like in one of the districts, I loved how they did this. They initially started off by doing 2 low intensity strategies in the fall and 2 in the spring. And then the next year of the implementation, they decided not to do that. They went to 1 and 1 because they decided to go deep. So for example, when they taught behavior specific praise and when they did instructional choice, their commitment was that every single person that was employed in the district had to learn at least the basics of what those strategies are. And then they had a different tier of professional learning for those that taught students. So people that were like paraprofessionals or teachers, gen ed, special ed teachers, they had to learn a certain level of competency. And then for people that were supporting interventions for kids that had tier 2 and tier 3 needs, they had to do even more. And they did these little checks for understanding. And so it was so legit in this district that literally the bus drivers learned it, custodians, cafeteria workers. And I just thought, what a gift to level the playing field so that every adult learned how to do it. And most, a lot of those people are parents. So think about like the impact of learning those strategies and being able to play it out. So if that is the case, like if your district's going to prioritize these, that might be one thing to do some long range planning on at your own calendar, or maybe if you get an opportunity to work with whomever is doing the district level planning, or your principal if you're on your Ci3T leadership team. But even for your own self, like what a gift it would be to say, once a month, I'm going to spend 15 minutes checking out this strategy, or just asking myself, maybe it's like you ask like a friend to come observe and say, can you watch me teach and just tally for me, like how many times did I pre-correct what was expected for behavior, or give me keep track of how many times I gave a praise statement to a kid paired with a ticket. But we can use those strategies. And I saw, some of you were talking about, and that I also feel like I need to get better at doing some of those tier 2 or tier 3 strategies. And ideally, if you're in a space where you're doing Ci3T, you might have like these intervention grids where you define what each of these interventions are. Like Read 180 is a validated reading intervention, oftentimes used as a tier 2 support. And if you're going to use that support, you might ask yourself, all right, for who might this be a good idea? And if it's going to be like students that are 9th through 12th grade, how are you going to find them? You're going to look for kids that are below benchmark. You might also look for kids that have some behavior challenges. And then anytime we do something extra for kids, we want to keep track of what do they think before we start this? Because if a kid straight up tells you, like, I'd be so humiliated to do this, like if it was a self-monitoring thing and they're like, I don't want this on my desk, then go to something else. Do a behavior contract, do check in, check out, or put this in a more covert thing, put it inside a notebook so that it's not visible for the eyes to see. But really ask the person that's going to use it if it's going to work for you. Because if they tell you straight up, they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it. So, and I think we've all had those moments instructionally. Point being, we want to make sure that when we're goal setting for the kids, that we have the conversations with them about like, is this a priority for you? And if it's not, and it's something fundamental, like getting to become a better reader, we need to help them to understand why that is such an important thing. Like, reading is going to be the primary way you learn learn like when you're on your phone, reading things on the internet. And that's like written expression. That's how you're going to woo women. That's how you're going to communicate with people. You want to make sure that you've got those skills that you need. Goal alignment cannot be understated. In addition, we want to make sure that treatment integrity is there, that you're keeping track of, just because I said this intervention is going to happen doesn't mean it is happening. And yes, we absolutely want to keep the data to see, is it working? So if I've got a kid engaged, saying I'm motivated, I'm there, and even sometimes really good interventions don't work for certain kids. It doesn't mean it's a bad kid or a bad teacher or a bad intervention. It means we need something that's a little bit different. A key part, though, is making sure that every kid gets an equal opportunity to access what they need. And that's why I urge you, however you're currently connecting kids to supports, please make sure that you're using systematic data to look 3 times a year to see, does this kid need more than tier 1 has to offer? Because we don't want to accidentally overlook a student who might have needs. So when we talk about looking at multiple sources of data, we're not saying you have to have 2 screeners of the same constructs. Like I don't need 2 things to look for internalizing or 2 look for acting out. When we say multiple sources of data, I need to know how the kid's doing in reading and math and internalizing and externalizing. And I can look at office discipline referrals and attendance and nurse visits, et cetera. But I'm going to use all those to make determinations as to who might need more. And if you don't yet have a tiered system built in your school or in your district, you want to go to places, resources to check out what are the available tier 2 and tier 3 supports. You want to have accurate detection as to who needs more. And we're going to want to take some time to access the literature to really check out things that we know work. So for example, like John Umbright designed this process, functional assessment-based interventions. It's designed for students that have intensive intervention needs. Eric Common did a beautiful review of the literature of that a few years ago, but it's a whole practical way to make a determination, like how do I find kids that might need it? How do I do the functional assessment? How do I build this intervention that has antecedent adjustments, shifts and reinforcement, and appropriately builds in extinction components? How do I test that? And I'm watching Elise's face because I know like this is going to be her baby in the years to come. But we want to have things like that we know if I do this as planned, it's going to get me the desired return on students' behavior. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to pop back into your conversation room, and we're going to think about, if you are in a school that's using Ci3T, we're going to encourage you literally pop open your treatment integrity data if you know where it is. And if you don't, take Wendy's advice and go ask, where can I find that? Like, I want to be able to see the information that's being summarized. And if you have that data, let's see where some places might be that you want to grow with your school. Or if you don't have those data, think about your own professional learning opportunities. Like, where do you want to really refine your own efforts? Like, what do I want to do in terms of growing in terms of professional learning. Like, what target do I want to do? Is it a low intensity support? Do I want to feel more confident in responding to challenging behaviors? Do I want it to be, do I want to get better at data, like knowing even how to collect data to see how kids are doing in terms of oral reading fluency or engagement or disruption? I also think that there's a value that comes within the environment. And you've heard like a lot, I'm assuming, about like toxic work environments or really negative culture by not effusive praise either. Like, praise has to be, you know, sincere, immediate, and not so frequent that it loses value. But when we're building new skills, we want to reinforce at a really high rate. And when they have maintained that, when they're starting to learn those skills, we want to thin the reinforcement schedule. The point would be, we can use our reinforcement skills to adjust based on the needs. But I think these are awesome goal. And I think that also the value of that long range planning that you guys were talking about is important, because we want to ideally have, you know, goals that are manageable and actionable and achievable. Sometimes I think we go, as educators, we push too hard for ourselves and have too many things. And so sometimes we might want to thinking about like doing the smallest possible shift with the highest possible return. So I loved how the conversation drifted towards behavior specific praise and drifted towards the acknowledgement, because at the end of the day, people do what they do because of the consequences that follow. But, you know, sometimes when we're thinking about these long range goals, we want to make sure that we have something that is attainable and achievable. We have so many things that we put on our plate that it becomes something that is insurmountable. Oh, that was it. So I was glad to hear us focus on the behavior specific praise piece, because that is like a really active ingredient of behavior change. And when I was starting to say about consequences, I, for one, used to think consequences were bad things. A consequence is just anything that comes after the behavior, and that's where all learning occurs. So we can create these really productive environments in our school where when kids come to school, we acknowledge them. We sincerely say, I'm glad you're here. So if a kid's been out for a couple of days, that's what we lead with, not like, oh my God, you're so far behind. I don't even know how I'm going to get you caught up. You might as well like just, you know, quit second grade now, because I'm never going to be able to get there. So we don't do that. We want to create warm, welcoming environments. And we also want to create places where it is okay to be successful. So we want to make sure that, yes, exactly what Wendy said, where a student feels seen. That's what every kid deserves, I think, is, you know, like genuine excitement, glad you're here, happy that you're here, and enjoy the time together. But anyway, the idea, positive, productive, clear, kind, and rigorous. And you can have all those things together. And I want to be really clear. Being positive and productive doesn't mean we're soft academically. We set targets. We want kids to become better readers. We want kids to become better writers. We want kids to be able to problem solve. So when we're thinking about setting professional learning goals of all these pieces, we do believe it's healthy for the community as a whole, for students, and for the adults. And so when we think about this, all putting all the pieces together, you have built something that people ideally believe is socially valid. They believe in the goals, they believe the procedures are reasonable, they think it's going to work. And when those three things are in play, we've actually done studies, as have other teams, that have shown social validity actually predicts treatment integrity. So like social validity, what you've built, that actually influences whether or not teachers report that they're going to implement that, and that they do implement it. We have another study that we're doing right now where we've learned that not only does it matter what the individual teacher rates in terms of social validity, it's also the team's views of social validity also play a role. So if I'm a teacher who buys in a team that buys in, that together really predicts implementation. That's why we have to not just silo ourselves, but we really need to be brave and think about what are we going to do ourselves and what we're going to support others in doing. So as we think about long range planning, before we head into like our last conversation, I'm not asking you to plan out your entire school. I'm asking you to think about for yourself, what do you want it to look like? There hopefully will be things taking place in your district, in your school, in your building. Like ideally, they will be offering professional learnings. If not, you might set as a target for yourself, I'm going to invest 30 minutes once a month to, pour a cup of coffee, get a tea, and cruise and check out these low intensity supports. Or I want to go to one empower session like this next year to learn more about kids with internalizing issues. Or I want to do a little bit more with understanding my screening data. So I might sign up for a session on that. Or I might want to go to know things like this next year. I might want to invest in reading and then think about something that's practical. So we're going to enjoy this last conversation together. We're going to take about 12 to 13 minutes. And I'm going to invite you to do two different things. I'd like you to think about what resources in professional learning are available to you as just like an individual. So there might be things that are offered at your district. You might check out our website, like for just on-demand things. You might have like books or resources, things that you're interested in reading. You might have different journals that you're interested in. We actually have a special issue that just came out. And it's one of the things that I am most proud of from this last year, because all first authors are current or former students. So Katie Austin, who's on this call tonight, she led an article on active supervision. And it's like, how do you do it in remote environments, in-person environments? How do you help families to do it? Rebecca and Wendy did one on pre-correction. Paloma Perez-Clark, who's not here tonight, she did one on behavior-specific praise. And then Katie Lane did one on instructional choice. And they're open access, which means they're journal articles that you don't have to pay to download. You don't have to be associated with the university. The other thing you might want to think about is your professional learning goals, as well as the connection to those goals with things that you feel like went really well in your building and where there might have been some bumps. I think it's okay to talk about the pain points in terms of like what didn't go well. It doesn't mean we're complaining. It doesn't mean we're not solutions-based. We're looking for a path forward. PBIS.org. So they've got tons of stuff. Like we just showed you the stuff on screening, but there's tons of free access resources there. And then the IRIS Center that Wendy pulled up, tons of wonderful modules that are available. And then you'll see that most of those are free. So you'll see like the little $0 for dollars. And those links that Katie Austin put into the chat, these are super, super practical. Some people are doing like book studies on these topics, and some people are like, that's just too much. If you decide to do something like this, this is not a research study. It's literally just designed to explain, here's the strategy, here's what it is, how do you do it? So there's a little vignette that explains like how it's situated, in this case, in a Ci3T system. It explains what Ci3T is. There's one that's situated in preschool, one in elementary, one in middle, and one in high. And then it literally just walks through step by step all the practicalities. Like, what do we mean? What is this strategy? What's the research behind it? And you'll see that's like super, super short, like less than a page. And importantly, how do I do it? And if you click on these, it'll take you also to some of those other resources that they were just sharing with you in that breakout room. So like if you want to go deeper on this topic, it'll make it clear that in this resource book, there's places that you can take it to the next level if you want to. And then there's guidance on like an implementation checklist. You can literally download it or you can display it. And it shows what it looks like in person, what it looks like in remote environment, during like remote instruction. And then importantly, how does it look like in a family-based context? Like how would I take that strategy and use it at home? Super, super practical. And the reason we try to feature these specifically, what we try to do is first synthesize what the literature says about something. So like that one I just showed you is on instructional choice. So like I mentioned earlier, David did a systematic review of here's everything that we know about instructional choice. And then members of our team like Robin Ennis has done an entire series of studies on instructional choice to build the knowledge base. And as that develops, then those are the things that we want to put in the hands of families and teachers and other educators, things that work.